I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
So, without further ado, let's get into Chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching. So, in the last couple of meetings, we went through the overall structure of Chapter 8 Tao Te Ching, and we picked out the 7 lines from line 5 down to line 11 that share the same structure. And that structure is very obvious. When you look at the Chinese characters, you've got this column, the second character, that is all the same through all 7 lines, and you've got these 7 lines at 3 characters each. So that is how we were able to determine a dividing line between section 1 and 2, and another dividing line between section 3 and section 2 and section 3, the final concluding section. Our focus has been on the middle 7 lines from 5 down to 11. So in these 7 lines, this is actually identified as something special by people who study the original in Chinese. Last time, we were actually able to get through most of the 7 lines in the centerpiece of this chapter, and we got near the bottom at that point. So the plan today is to focus on the 7, starting with a quick recap with a bunch of examples, and then finish up the 6 and 7, and then go to the concluding remarks. That is the plan. Okay, so those 7 lines are known as 水之七德, the Chinese character that you see here, and this is from left to right. Chinese characters can also be written right to left. The typical traditional sequence of writing Chinese is up, down, right, left. But because of encounters with Western culture, there are parts of the Chinese-speaking world that has gone to the same sequence as English. That is, horizontal instead of vertical, and from left to right instead of right to left. So it's going to be the same as English. So 水之七德. Let me translate that for everyone. Those of you that have studied Mandarin, you know that these are not the trickiest characters to translate. They're actually quite simple. The first one, 水, that means water. The second character, 之, that is an apostrophe S. So waters, and then 2 characters. This character, the third character, means 7, the number 7. The last character, 德, means virtue. So water's 7 virtues. And if you want to say it in a way that flows better in English, you would swap part 1 and part 2 so that it becomes the 7 virtues of water. So that's how we translate that. So this is a set expression. This is a 4-character expression in Mandarin, and it always refers to chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching, and that's because of the 7 lines. So what exactly are the 7 virtues of water? Let me go ahead and run through them with you, and then I'll do a quick recap as to specific highlights from the 7, from the first part of the 7 that we have already talked about. So the first virtue is described as dwelling with the right location. That is a virtue of humility. So remember what we have talked about, and that is water always flows to the lowest point. The place that people dislike because it is quote-unquote lowly and therefore must be bad, people, out of arrogance, will oftentimes seek the high ground in the sense of gaining a higher profile, to be more highly visible, to be seen by everybody, to satisfy the ego. Water has no issues with ego, and it will therefore automatically and naturally flow to the lowest location, and that's humility. Number 2, dealing with great depth. So here, great depth means that the Tao cultivator, the sage, is not a shallow person. There is a lot more to this person than meets the eyes. There is a lot more that he or she has learned. There is a lot more to their understanding, and they may not reveal everything right off the bat. Number 3, giving with great kindness. Kindness, in this case, is synonymous with compassion. And the great kindness of water is that it is the exact same great kindness for everyone. So compassion for all. It doesn't matter what kind of animal you are, what kind of plant you are, water will give itself to you with equal kindness. And then number 4, speaking with integrity. This is about being trustworthy, being honest, being straightforward, being plain spoken, speaking with great integrity, keeping your word, not going back on a promise. Number 5, governing with great administration. This is about leadership, but the term leadership can be applied in a whole bunch of different ways. So it's leadership and also administration. So leadership in terms of leading other people, but also taking charge of your own life, being the leader, the ruler, the absolute monarch in your own life. Number 6, we've got handling with great capability. This is about the versatile effectiveness of water. So this is the point at which we stopped last time, where I spoke of how water can be steam and be powering, mechanical contraptions using the vast power of steam. And for quite some time, great civilization was powered by steam. And then there's also, of course, water in its liquid form, very effective, very powerful. It's capable of drilling through a rock given time, and we certainly use it in our civilization for hydroelectric power. And then, of course, ice in solid form. Water's solid form can be used for all kinds of things, and in fact, it's pretty hard to envision life today without the wonders of water as ice. Pretty much we have taken it for granted, but let me ask you just one question. Where would we be without our iced latte coffee? I don't know. I'm not sure that, life will be quite as enjoyable without my daily iced coffee. And then lastly, number 7, which we have yet to get to, is moving with great timing. All that I would like to do for now is to ask everyone to remember the 2 points. Point number 1, great timing means not too soon, not too late. In other words, at just the right time. So remember those 2 points. So now let me hit the highlights. So I want to first address what happens when there's a lack of humility, when there's arrogance in life. So what Lao Tzu says is that water is the opposite of human beings. Human beings will seek the higher profile in order to have greater visibility, to showcase yourself, to be a show-off. Now, if this is done without harming other people, it would be perhaps okay, although it is still an ego manifestation. But oftentimes, what we observe in society is that people tend to elevate themselves by trying to put others down. That is something that I see quite a bit. Have you seen it? I certainly have. So when people do that, they may say, well, it's because, I have standards. They try to make it sort of a good thing. It's because I have standards that I put other people down, that I'm critical of other people. I dispense criticism only because I'm such a perfectionist. It's the cross I bear. It's the burden that I have. Yeah, I wish I wasn't such a perfectionist, but I just got to make sure the job is done right, And that's kind of a humble brag. Yeah, the things I do, I really aim for that perfection because I'm just such an impossible perfectionist. It makes me impossible to live with, but that's the price that I pay for being such a perfectionist. That's a humble brag. It goes back to ego manifestation. It goes back to elevating oneself. Hey, look at everybody else. You're not as much a perfectionist as I am. I'm at a higher place than you. So even though this person ostensibly is saying that, it's such an awful thing, I'm such a perfectionist, it's actually a brag. Thus, the humble brag. Now, in my personal experience, I have seen this play out at the workplace. So this particular individual that I know, this friend that I know, was exactly the first 3 bullet points that you see here. So what this gentleman did was that, he wanted to basically elevate himself, climb the corporate ladder by criticizing other people including other coworkers and also other departments. So I know that one time there was a difficult project undertaken by another department, and forgive me for not being too specific, so that it's identifiable, but a project that was done by another department in a meeting for all staff. My friend stood up and tore that project to pieces in the sense of criticizing all of the problems that he saw with that particular project. He pointed out that the project was delayed, that it was encountering delays, that it was over budget, and that the results that's been accomplished thus far were far from satisfactory. So he pointed out failing after failing for that particular project, basically putting another department, up for ridicule by the entire company. So this was obviously a very uncomfortable situation for the other department, and his senior leadership, his senior executive said that, well, okay, you're making some solid points. You are backing up everything that you're saying with facts. So since you are so familiar with the problems associated with this project, what we would like to ask you to do is to take over this project and carry it to completion. And so my friend was very happy. He had no awareness that he had acted against the teachings of the Tao. He was not being humble like the Tao would advise him to be. Instead, he was actually showcasing himself, being rather arrogant. But he was very happy. He thought, finally, my big break, my opportunity to showcase what I can do. So he actually began to work on this particular project. As soon as he started, he realized the difficulties inherent in the work of the project that were not very obvious when he was just on the sidelines. When he was observing and criticizing, he didn't realize some of the hidden gotchas and the difficulties and the obstacles that he would encounter. So then suddenly, all of these obstacles are hitting him all at once, and he worked really hard to try to overcome them until he hit a particular set of obstacles where he realized that I can't do this with the resources in my own department alone. I must work with other departments in order to bring the project to completion. One of the departments that he needed to work with happened to be the department that he singled out for criticism at the all-staff meeting. So, awkward. When he went to this other department, asked for their help, asked for their advice, asked for their experience, he basically hit a brick wall. And why not? They all felt that he spared no effort at criticizing them in attempting to humiliate them. So why would they help him? So they gave him as little help as they could get away with, which for him was basically no help at all. So he eventually carried that project to a very bad end that things were even worse than when he began to criticize the project. And he learned, I hope he learned a lesson from that experience, and that is arrogance does not pay, and as it says in the Bible, pride goeth before a fall. So he projected a lot of pride, a lot of arrogance at the old staff meeting. When he got the chance to prove himself that he could do better, he stumbled and fell. So that's a pattern in the manifestation of arrogance. It's a pattern that we do see over and over again in life. So this is what we covered last time when we talked about water dwelling in the right location. And so what I want to do is just show it again this time and remind everyone of the 2 points. Number one, water occupying the lowest place is a visual imagery for the Tao of humility. Now, remember, this is the first of the 7 virtues. So another aspect of it is number 2. By being observant and acting only when appropriate or necessary, it appears as though the Tao cultivator is always at the right place at the right time. So dwelling at the right place is one part of it. Dwelling with the right location. The timing of it, that's another part. And we will see that again when we get to the virtue of water, number 7. That's at the very end. This is number 1. So keep that in mind. So we have seen number 1, dwelling with the right location, humility. Number 2, feeling with great depth, not a shallow person. So not just the extent of your feelings, feeling very deeply for other people, but also great depth in terms of your character, in terms of what you know, the level of your knowledge, of your attainment, accomplishment. So I feel like I have encountered quite a few people in Tao cultivation who know number 2 intuitively. That is, when I encounter them, I get to know them. I find that they are very interesting individuals, but then later on, as I got to know them better, I uncover more layers to their personality. That is, they reveal all kinds of talents that I was not aware of before. And every time there's a layer of the onion that's peeled back, there's a new discovery. Wow, I had no idea this person was so incredibly talented. This is so cool. So that is not a shallow person. And then number 3, giving with great kindness, meaning compassion for all. This I really would like to focus on quite a bit today because compassion is a major topic in the Tao, and we also happen to live in rather chaotic times right now where I think our society as a whole can use greater compassion. that we can treat one another better. So I want to address this issue from the perspective of society at large. But more than that, I also want to talk about how we interact with one another. In the interactions with one another, I want to divide it up into a couple of different domains. One possible interaction we have with other people is online. So think about the prevalence of social media. Whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and so on, we have many different ways of interacting with other people, some of which we have never met, and some of which we will encounter in real life. So how would that work? How is that different? I would like to address that. And the other domain, of course, is person-to-person interaction. This covers our interactions with friends, family, coworkers, etc. Anyone with which we come into personal contact, I would include in that second domain. So, but let's begin with some consideration for what is happening in society today. So, on the topic of humility, I spoke of the manifestation patterns of arrogance. Now, I would like to talk about the opposite of compassion, and I could use a term like hatred. I could use different terms, but I chose cruelty. Hatred, as I pointed out before, it can only exist if there's fear that is just underneath the surface. Fear tends to breed that contempt that becomes aversion and hatred. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm talking about being unkind when I use the term like cruelty. So I specifically want to focus on a lack of compassion to the least fortunate among us. Chances are, if you're in a position to listen to this particular talk today, that means you're actually doing pretty well. You may be like, oh, well, you know, I'm still, and I don't know what the problems are with people who are connecting online, but perhaps some people will say, well, you know, my computer's not exactly fast enough. Or some people may say, well, yeah, I'm tuning in to the online broadcast, but gosh, I only have Windows 8.1. I don't have Windows 10. So all of the above are first world problems. So think about the people out there whose livelihood, whose survival is an issue. They're not worried about whether or not they're on Windows 8.1 or Windows 10. So that's what I mean by the least fortunate among us. So how is it that in our society, there are people who are actually unkind, cruel, hateful against those who are the least fortunate? How does that even happen? How does that begin? Well, just as hatred has the underlying cause of fear, fear breeds hatred, when we find people who are unkind, who are lacking in compassion toward others, it always begins with separation. When I say separation, what I mean specifically is from a spiritual context. That is, when you understand that everyone is connected on some level, inextricably connected to one another on some level, it is much, much harder to be unkind, to be cruel. But when you begin with separation, turning a blind eye to the commonalities that bind us and unite us, then suddenly it's easier and easier. You know, while they're not the same as us, that's the beginning of tribalism. You know, they're different. And when you say different, that's usually a code word for inferior. They're different and inferior. You may not say the word inferior, but that is very much in the mind of the person who has that separation in mind. So the effect of that, it makes it so much easier to demonize and dehumanize an entire group of people. And that will manifest, we're talking about manifestation patterns, that will manifest as slurs So for instance, prior to the Holocaust of World War II, the European Jews were called animals who infested the great land, belonging to people other than the oppressed. And therefore, it became much easier to gather them up together like cattle into concentration camps to enact genocide. So it justifies exclusion and even genocide. So why were there slurs being used, for instance, in the Vietnam War? Well, because it makes the enemy combatants that much easier to kill. It is so much easier to kill someone when you refuse to acknowledge or recognize their essential humanity. So, how was it that Japanese Americans were put into an internment camp during World War II? Well, again, it was easier to demonize and dehumanize an entire group when you refuse to acknowledge their humanity. So let me ask this question. What would happen if a hateful individual gets to know the hated group? So think about the water metaphor applying to that. When water from different streams flow into a lake, they mingle together, they come together, they embrace one another. There's no difference between water from one stream versus another stream. So if human beings are able to emulate that particular virtue, be accepting of other groups as if were their own, then we would be sidestepping a lot of the problems that we do have. So in real life, this has sometimes occurred among people, giving us hope for humanity. So precisely what happens if a hateful individual gets to know the hated group is that a recognition occurs. Well, gosh, the hated ones, no matter what that group is, the hated people, gee, they're just like us. Wow, I had no idea. And this is actually the content of a recent talk from this particular individual. This is Reverend Jim Martin. He's speaking specifically from a Christian perspective on what is currently happening in our society, where we're deeply divided. We have people who are being treated in ways that are very inhumane. So he talks about how some people will justify those cruel behaviors that lack of compassion by saying that, well, they're breaking the law. Those refugees, those immigrants are breaking the law, and therefore they have to answer to the law. So what the Reverend says is that Christians know that there are unjust laws. Throughout the history of Christianity, there have been times when Christians were persecuted. So Christians are no stranger to unjust laws. But then there's also God's law. And what God's law says about the least fortunate among us, such as the migrants or the refugees, is to welcome them. That's God's law. And he further says, when you demonize and cast an entire group of people like animals infesting our land, that it makes them so much easier to hate. But when you get to know them, you realize that, well, they're actually exactly the same. He has personally encountered and worked closely with the refugees, and he'll be the first to tell you that they have hopes and dreams. They are escaping calamities, warfare, all the problems, just like you would, in order to protect your family. So once you get to know them, you realize that these people are not animals. They are people just like you. They have stories just like any other human being, including yourself. When that is the case, hatred becomes impossible. So if you haven't seen that talk by Reverend Jim Martin, I would encourage you to seek it out on YouTube. I find it personally very moving. It was the best 2 minutes that I had ever spent. Yes, only 2 minutes, a very brief but very deep talk. Then I want to showcase another gentleman for everyone's attention. Of course, you may not know who that is. The gentleman, the person that I want to talk about is the gentleman to the left. His name is Daryl Davis, an African American, as you can see. And yes, he is standing in front of a Confederate flag. The flag to the right is the KKK flag. That is the Ku Klux Klan flag. What is he doing? What is he doing in this picture? Well, let me tell you about Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is an accomplished musician. So when he was a younger man, he toured the country with his band. And so this is back in the 80s. This was 1983. He played for the first time at this place on the middle of nowhere called the Silver Dollar Lounge. So in that entire establishment, he was the only person who was black. Everybody, it was just like a lily white place. So he was the only person there. He plays the keyboard. So when his band was done, one of the patrons, a customer, came to thank him and said that, you know, he really enjoyed the music that the band was playing. And he said that, you know, I've never seen a black man play music like that, you know, just like Jerry Lee Lewis. So this caught Daryl by surprise. And Daryl said, well, I mean, Daryl thought, you know, well, there's so many other great piano players out there. Certainly Jerry Lee Lewis, you know, is not the only one. And so he asked this gentleman, he said, well, what do you think that Jerry Lee Lewis learned the music from? And the customer, the gentleman had no idea. He said, well, I don't know. So Daryl said, well, he learned it from the same place I did. The black blues, boogie-woogie piano players, the greats, that's the beginning of the blues music, rockabilly, rock and roll. It all came from there. And the gentleman said, no, Jerry Lee Lewis, he invented all that. So, and then they're sitting down having a drink, and the gentleman asked, well, do you know this is the first time in my life that I've ever had a drink with a black man? So Daryl's thinking, you know, I'm 25 years old, and I've already had thousands of drinks and meals with all kinds of people, whites, blacks, everybody. And this gentleman was like 40, mid-40s. So he's saying that all his life, this is the first time that he's ever had, you know, a drink with a black man. So he said, why? And the gentleman was reticent and didn't want to say why. But his friend sitting next to him kept nudging him with the elbow. Tell him, right? So the gentleman finally said, well, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So Daryl did not expect that. He burst out laughing because he thought, yeah, you're joking. You belong to the KKK. You're having a drink with me. You know, what a joker, right? And he's laughing, and he's like, you know, no, I'm serious. And he pulls out his wallet. He brings out a card, and Daryl recognized the symbol of the KKK. That's a membership card. He had never seen that before, a KKK membership card. So Daryl is like, you know, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And thus began Daryl's lifelong quest that became a hobby of his. He decided that he wanted to befriend as many of these guys as possible because, after all, there they were at the Silver Dollar Lounge, sitting together, being united in the music that was just being played, having a drink, having a good time, being very friendly. So Daryl began this personal project, this hobby of his. He wanted to write a book about this. And he had his secretary book appointments and, leveraging his friendship with KKK members that he had befriended, he asked for introduction with the higher-ups in the KKK organization. So over the years, he has encountered many such members, this gentleman being one of them. And he says, there was this one time he's driving and sitting in the passenger seat next to him. This was one of the early interviews, and it's fascinating. So sitting in the passenger seat was an Exalted Cyclops of the KKK organization. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. That's just someone that's higher up, like a grand dragon. So they're talking, they're chatting, and the Exalted Cyclops said, well, you know that blacks have a gene that makes them violent. And so he's driving, and he's like, listen, I'm as black as they get. I've never done a carjacking or drive-by shooting. I wouldn't hurt anyone, so why would you say that? Why would you say that about me? And so the Exalted Cyclops said, well, that's because you have the gene in you, but it's latent. It's still lying in waiting. It hasn't shown up yet. So Daryl was so dumbfounded, he had no idea what to say. So kept driving in silence, while the Exalted Cyclops sat back with a very smug and satisfied expression, like, ha, got you there. You got no answer to that, do you? So after a while, Daryl said, well, one thing we all know about white people is that they're all serial killers. And so Exalted Cyclops is like, well, how's that? What do you mean? And Daryl said, well, name me 3 black serial killers. So he's trying to think, let's see, Charles Manson, he's a white guy, Ted Bundy, white, all these serial killers, they're all white. So he said, so Daryl said, son, you're a serial killer. And so Exalted Cyclops is like, I've never killed anybody before in my life. That's a stupid thing to say. So that at that point, Daryl said, well, yeah, it was stupid, but it was no less stupid than what you had said to me. So anyhow, they continued their friendship. They drove on, and he heard from other of his friends that this particular Exalted Cyclops, who was highly placed in the KK organization, that several years after that, he voluntarily left that organization. And in fact, this particular person was the first one from which Daryl collected his robes and hood. To date, Daryl has more than 200 robes from all the ex-KKK members that he had befriended. Why? How? Well, the secret is simple. Once you got to know him, once you get to know somebody, once you get to know that person as a human being, it's not possible to hate that person. It's not possible to dislike that person because you realize that they have the exact same humanity that you do. So by this point, by now, you may say that, well, that's great for Daryl. That's a very interesting story. But, I probably, I live in the West Coast. I live on the East Coast. I'm probably not going to have the same encounter that Daryl did. So what about me? How would the Tao apply to me in that instance? And that's where I want to move the discussion to something lighter, something that's not the chaos that we're witnessing in society today, but something that perhaps we will witness in our daily lives. or something that happens to us individually. So down here, I have a little email. I want to lead up to it and talk about how this applies to us in everyday life. The example that I want to use is Jessica Walsh. And you can see you've got Jessica Walsh to Andrea. Hey, Andrea, hope you're well. A friend of mine pointed me to your website, and I think you have some nice projects. I'd love to grab coffee and chat about things. Let me know if you have any availability next week. I know that's kind of small, but that's because I'm making room for other stuff that I want to share with you. Here's what Jessica looks like. She's involved in the design world. She's a designer. She puts out a lot of different designs, and she belongs to the design community. Now, for women, there's an added dimension. There's another challenge that men perhaps are not too aware of, and that is the mutual sniping and attack and backstabbing that can occur. And this is what Jessica has talked about. So in her work as a designer, she has often been the target of attacks, and it's from other women who are also designers, people who are like herself, perhaps due to jealousy, perhaps due to envy. They will attack her in various ways, especially in social media. So the challenge for her was to not fight fire with fire, but to be more like water and overcome the heart with the self. So the challenge was to seek out those who have done us wrong, which in her case are the people who are attacking her. So those attacks can sometimes become very severe, and I'll show you an example in just a minute. The challenge is also to be kind to those people by understanding their POV. Does everyone know what I mean by POV? Okay. Well, by understanding their point of view, you know, why do they say what they say? So I want to specifically mention that this applies to social media, not just our daily interactions with people, and that can include cyberbullying, stalking, shaming, etc. So for Jessica, the challenge for her, so this Andrea, what's she done, right? Well, here's a couple of messages that she typed up on the internet for their community. So one of the attacks, Jessica Walsh is way worse than a Britney Spears song. Oh my goodness, that's a deadly insult. And another one from the same person, from Andrea. I hope that Jessica Walsh gets food poisoning today. You know, what would make you hate someone enough to write something like that? And Jessica says, those attacks I can actually ignore. But then there are other ones right after these two that become more severe, such as Jessica Walsh is only successful because she's young and pretty. And Jessica Walsh probably slept her way to the top. Then she's like, okay, that's really hurtful, you know. So what she decided to do, and she really didn't feel like it, she wanted to have nothing to do with the cyberbully by the name of Andrea. So she forced herself to be kind by reaching out with this particular message. Hope you're well. A friend of mine has pointed out your website. I think you've got some nice projects. I'd love to chat. You know, what's your availability next week? So Jessica did not expect that days later she would receive a very warm and positive reply, like, yeah, I love your work. Let's get together and talk. So Jessica's like, you know, well, what happened to all those hurtful tweets? She went back and looked for those tweets, they were all deleted. So then Jessica thought, well, probably Andrea doesn't know that I have already read those tweets, right? She deleted them. So they met, they talked, and Andrea came away with some insight. That number one, Andrea wanted to attack a bigger target in order to be visible, in order to have higher profile. Like by attacking her, somehow you are at the same level as the target of your attack. Number two, she actually meant it in tongue-in-cheek fashion. Like Andrea doesn't really want anyone to die of food poisoning. So she's actually being kind of cheeky and sarcastic when she wrote that, but that cannot be conveyed when you're typing it out as a tweet, you know? And even if you were to put in emoticons, emojis, it doesn't seem to soften the impact all that much. So they came away as friends. And from that point on, Andrea's online behavior towards her became completely different. That she turned around 180 degrees and had nothing but positive, glowing, praiseworthy things to say about Jessica. And that's when Jessica realized that the approach, the Tao approach of kindness, compassion, is way more effective than fighting fire with fire, like, fighting back by criticizing her. Oh, you think you got me, well, I'm going to get you. After a while, maybe Jessica will be like, okay, now we're even. You insulted me, now I insulted you back. But then the other side is sore, so they continue on, and now they feel like they're even, but now you feel hurt. So you are plotting retribution, and the cycle never ends. So this is one of the virtues of water, is that softness will always overcome harshness. I can see that we don't have a whole lot of time today. We're going to need to begin the summer ritual pretty soon. So I want to end with another story that also applies to modern times, but that has nothing to do with social media or the internet, but hopefully something that people can use. So this story is about a young couple recently married, and they live next door to an elderly couple. The young couple, soon after marriage, realized that there's going to be some friction because they have some differences. The young wife enjoys shopping, socializing with friends. The husband enjoys sports, watching sports. So when the young wife wants the husband to accompany her to the shopping mall, he really prefers to stay home and watch TV. And when the husband wants to talk about sports, the young wife is completely disinterested. So other differences in the personality became the source of friction and then later on conflict. So occasionally they would fight. In the meantime, every time they see the elderly couple is always lovey-dovey, holding hands, and loving stares to one another. So they seem like the very opposite of the young couple. The young couple sometimes are good, sometimes are not so good. Sometimes things are harmonious, other times things are kind of chaotic and contentious. So one day, things really got out of hand, that the young couple was fighting once again. And this was the first time that there was physical altercation, meaning pushing, shoving, throwing things around, making a lot of noise. So that noise was heard by all of their neighbors, and because the elderly couple knew them, they were concerned about what might be happening. So they came rushing to their house, knocked on their door. What's going on? Is everybody okay? So When they opened up their door, seeing the elderly couple, while the young wife was in tears, crying, she's crying, and, the husband is like angry, mad. So the wife went with the older wife to the elderly couple's home to talk about what happened, whereas the older gentleman stayed with the husband in his home to talk. So the husband explains the source of the conflict. Of course, he was always in the right, and the marriage, there's going to be some differences between the two of them, so it's probably not going to work out. Maybe they're better off separating, divorcing, blah, blah, blah. And then the young man became curious, how is it that you and your wife are always so lovey-dovey? How is it that you are so loving? What is your secret? Do you start out with similar interests? And the old man says, no, actually, myself and my wife were quite different. She's very active. She's a very dynamic person. I'm very quiet and reserved. She likes to go different places. I like more serene, peaceful activities. And that's the reason why I took up Tai Chi. So as I'm practicing Tai Chi, I was realizing, one day I realized that the principles of Tai Chi I could apply to my personal life as well. When there's an incoming attack, if you know Tai Chi, you know that you can deflect with a circular movement. So I do that. I started doing that in my life, and my marriage became 100% better. And so the young man is like, well, I don't know Tai Chi. What do I do? How should I make my own marriage better? And the old man says, actually, there are only 4 things you need to learn. 4 things. Anytime you have a fight, just do the 4 things in sequence, and I guarantee you it's going to work out just fine. That's what I did. That's what I started doing many years ago, and I've got very good results, as you can see. So the young man is like, what are the 4 things? So the old man is like, very simple. Number 1, begin with an apology. Sorry, honey, that was all my fault. It could be any kind of apology. That's number 1. And so the young man is like, well, that's pretty simple. What are the other 3 things? And the old man says, number 2, fetch a glass of water. Bring a glass of water. And the young man is like, what? That's it? The old man says, yes, because you have already offered an apology, you can be fairly certain that the water in the glass won't end up in your face. When you offer the glass of water, now she might look at it and still be really angry and not want to touch it. That's okay. That's when you go to step number 3. The young man says, what's that? And old man says, step number 3 is a massage, is a volunteer massage. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm sure you're all stressed out because of the fight. Because of the offer of water and the apology before that, she won't push you away. Number 4, the last part, seek the appropriate opportunity to tell a joke. So the 4 things in sequence are, probably everybody remembers, right? 1, apology, okay? And number 2, 1 glass of water. Number 3, massage. And number 4, a joke. That works like magic. So by that time, because she has started to relax, when you crack a joke at the appropriate time, she breaks out laughing, and that will diffuse the tension. So the young man says, well, when would I get a chance to do that? And the old man says, right now. So at that point, the old lady brought the wife back, who was still in tears, but now the husband knew what to do. This is the way of the Tao. It is the most effective of all because the soft overcomes the hard. One of the virtues of water. Okay, so we're running out of time. I'm going to jump ahead to the summary. You're going to recognize the summary. It's the same as last time. Summary as a reminder for everybody. Remember, if you want clarity about life, about where you're going, a prerequisite of that clarity is peace. You need to still your heart, your mind, your spirit sufficiently, like water that's undisturbed, that can reflect everything accurately, clearly. So if you want to know what to do with your life, you first have to calm way down to have the clarity to see it. Number 2, be versatile. Be like water who can fit into any container and assume the shape of that container, or can find any possible path as it flows downstream. So you always want to adjust your approach to a particular goal. And number 3, like rainfall relieving the drought, take action when it will do the most good. So the point about moderation is that you don't want it to be too soon or too late. You want to do it at the perfect time. You want it to have the greatest impact.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位点传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.